welcome to the Temple Mount podcast. I'm Shogun, and today we have an open discussion podcast on the subject of the war on drugs. So we're all going to just dig into this. It'll be the first of a series of events on this topic, approaching it from all angles. But before we get started on this very important topic, make sure you've joined the Temple Mount Discord server and follow and subscribe to the Temple Mount podcast on YouTube and SoundCloud. You can find that at the top of the server in the important information section. That being said, welcome everybody. Hermes, everybody has a lot to say about this topic, I think, but it was your idea. So do you want to give us some opening remarks?
Sure, yeah. I would consider the war on drugs one of the greatest failures of our time, one of the most damaging wars that has spilled the blood of many innocent people, that has ruined the lives of many young people with a lot of potential, that has wasted an enormous amount of taxpayer money on non-violent crimes, that has sustained horrible organizations like the cartel, and that it has been used to selectively target specific minority groups disproportionately so that it would be easier to not let those groups get power because of the political threat they could pose to society. And what else should I say about it? It's entirely hypocritical from beginning to end, from the fact that alcohol and tobacco is legal, whereas drugs like mushrooms are not. The science, of course, would show that if any drug should be illegal, alcohol and tobacco should be right there at the top, whereas shrooms not only is not harmful, is quite beneficial. I'm not saying alcohol should be illegal. I'm just saying if we're even to be consistent, those should be on the worst list. Yet, shrooms are considered Schedule 1, and Schedule 1 means that it has no medicinal purposes, and it has a higher potential for abuse. This goes against every scientific literature on the subject of psilocybin, or more specifically shrooms, magic mushrooms, whatever. So it's inconsistent, it's hypocritical, it's not based on science, it has been used to oppress people, it has hurt a lot of people, it's wasted a lot of money, it's evil to its core, and I think we should do something about it. And that's how I'm going to start.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I'll just state some more fairly obvious, groundwork, but you never know where people are at with the conversation. So as policy, the war on drugs doesn't work. Really the evidence all shows you have to treat it as a public health problem, not as like a justice issue when you're talking about drug use, because drug use essentially is a phenomenon of mental health. It doesn't make any sense to say that we support people with mental illness, but we screw over people with addiction, because addiction is really a form of mental illness. It's a compulsive, out of control behavior that involves, loss of control of your mental faculties and blah, blah, blah. So you have to do harm reduction and rehabilitation and all this. You can't criminalize people who do it, because if you do that, all you do is break up their families. And if you throw somebody in jail, the main problem is that person is almost inevitably also somebody's father, a little girl or little boy's father. And, if you take people and throw them in jail because they buy, use, or sell drugs, you break families. And when you break families, you traumatize the children. And when you traumatize the children, you exponentially increase the risk that they too will get into drugs, especially financially, economically. They may need to survive, because you put the financial breadwinner of the family into prison. This is how you end up with, horrible situations of cyclical crime and gang violence in the inner city with black communities, because they're throwing all the black fathers in jail, and a single parent without father households exponentially increases the risk the kids will get into gangs and crime. So it's like they're just getting screwed on both ends. So this is just an inhumane policy that doesn't work. Not to mention, like you said, when you don't control the monopoly on something like drugs, it's inevitable and obvious that someone's going to step in and fill that vacuum. So it's like, if you leave a bazooka on the floor and you don't pick that bazooka up, someone else is going to pick that bazooka up, and now they have fucking bazooka and you're in a lot of trouble. Very crude metaphor, but that's what's happened here with the cartel. So We need to tax that, raise those trillions of dollars ourselves, and then provide clinics that provide legal drugs, because recreational drugs like cocaine and heroin included, because then they can be safe, pure, right? The biggest problem with heroin right now is fentanyl. Fentanyl's killing people everywhere. If there was legal heroin, a lot less people would be dying of fentanyl because there wouldn't be fentanyl in the legal heroin. It's just common sense. And it's been tried and it works. And it's done in places. They even have safe injection sites. You can even, in some places, they give heroin addicts either free methadone or free heroin. And even the state giving people free heroin sounds crazy, but in reality, it's good policy, because when addicts don't have heroin, they go into withdrawal. They become desperate enough to commit violent crimes and robberies. Whereas if you just give them a little piece of heroin, they actually can be functional citizens. They can go to work, they can hold down jobs. So, you don't want a bunch of desperate, sick, crazy junkies running around doing anything they can for the next fix. Just give them a little bit of drugs, and the tax dollars actually go a lot farther than trying to lock them up in prisons and give them 3 square meals a day. That's the most inefficient possible way to deal with the issue. So that's what I'll say for the first time, I guess. Does anybody else have any comments or anything about the war on drugs?
I did have one thing that you said that I didn't entirely agree with, but the last part about locking people away for doing drugs is another issue. It's more like I don't believe that the war on drugs starts with like you can't lock them away. Like you made me realize I do think that as far as the war on drugs go, where we can do with in a community sense is most likely warn people about the dangers of these drugs. It says like the war on drugs shouldn't be fought. Like you can't stop drug abuse once it has entered the family, but you can warn people of coming generations. Ah, so sorry. I gotta mute myself on these.
I would like to say that at first I greatly agree that this should be treated medically. For sure, this is a medical issue 100%. And to criminalize it is basically criminalizing being sick, mentally ill, or being susceptible to certain addictions. And that is inhumane. And um, un- it's inhumane and cruel and unusual. Uh, it's horrible all the way to the core, and it is literally targeting the people that are vulnerable, that need the help the most, which makes it even that much more morally atrocious. Um, and the fact that, I mean, first of all, if you're trying to fix a problem, you don't deal with the symptom, you deal with the causal issues, the causal factors that led to those symptoms, such as addiction, such as whatever, lack of purpose in life, whatever. There's many things that can lead a person to do drugs, poverty being one of them. And, addressing those causal factors, I think, would be a more logical approach. But I don't think there's anything logical about the war on drugs. Not at all. Almost none of it is based on science. The hypocrisy with respect to alcohol and tobacco is clear and open for everyone to see. And of course, back in the old days, we had the Prohibition Act, which was then repealed with another amendment. I forgot. It was like God damn it. I forgot which amendment was the prohibition, which one was the repeal or whatever. But regardless, this is not something that is based on science. It is totally a panic, a moral panic, as well as an attempt to control certain groups. A good example of why that is the case is the disproportionate punishment, for example, for crack. Um, Crack was more used in African American areas. I do believe it was introduced by the CIA. I'm not sure. I could be wrong. There was the whole Iran Contra affair. Where, again, I'm not sure about the details. I could be wrong, but I do believe the drugs were either directly introduced or guided to those neighborhoods with the intention of raising money. I mean, the main scandal was selling weapons to Iran to raise money for the revolution, but I do believe selling drugs was also part of it. I could be wrong. If I am, regardless, the fact remains that the punishment for crack was a lot greater than cocaine, and cocaine was usually used more by rich white people, and crack was not. So this disproportionate sentencing also seems to indicate some form of systemic bias, and that's pretty messed up and fucked up. And of course, locking people up in prison isn't gonna solve the issue. It's only gonna make it worse. You go there for a nonviolent crime, you go to criminal college, which is prison, you get tortured, you get a felony record, which makes it less likely that you can be reintegrated in society and get a job. It's just fucked up all the way inside out. If there's anything that people should get angry over and get a pitchfork, and a torch and go on the streets and march right now, it would be the war on drugs. Even just a few days, was it a few days ago? Was it yesterday? I don't know when, but recently somebody was killed for a no-knock warrant. No-knock warrants in a state where you have the Second Amendment and the right to protect yourself is contradictory and is a recipe for disaster. And the entire purpose of the no-knock warrant, which has led to people's deaths, by the way, is just so people don't flush the drugs down the toilet. So people have died because of the rush, of jumping in and preventing evidence from being flushed down. What a great priority for society, of course. There really isn't a single part of this war on drugs that doesn't boil my blood. Also to add more information to it, the horrible part of the war on drugs started with Richard Nixon when he signed the Controlled Substance Act into law, which calls for the regulation of certain drugs and substances. I'm reading this from history.com, by the way. And according to that website, Schedule 1 drugs are considered the most dangerous as they pose a very high risk for addiction with little evidence of medicinal benefits. Marijuana, LSD, heroin, MDMA, and other drugs are included on the list of Schedule 1 drugs. So marijuana has, according to the scheduling, I'm not saying it, according to the scheduling, has little evidence of medicinal benefits and very high risk for addiction. Now, I can argue that it can be potentially psychologically addicting, potentially. Of course, that would require other causal factors, such as being prone to addiction and having other issues with your life. But also, drugs like psilocybin and LSD, and MDMA, which have been used to treat addiction and actually improve your quality of life and have a myriad of medicinal benefits. Those are still also considered Schedule 1, which is batshit insane. And really, I know I'm talking softly, but holy shit, this is something that should definitely make your blood boil. Anyone want to jump in or chime in or something?
It's Hawthorne.
I do have a few questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
Were you
sure.
no, Hawthorne? I think he keyed up first.
Yeah, because as you're going about the war on drugs, I thought it was going to be more into the history. I didn't
Can you hear
just
me?
an open discussion about
BK?
it. Oh, yes, my bad.
So I'm pretty sure Hawthorne was actually speaking first. Did you have something you wanted to say, Hawthorne?
Yeah, just a little different take on it. I just posted a link in general chat. BC, British Columbia, where I live, has 6 deaths a day through the last year. 2,200 people died from fentanyl overdoses, which is like contaminated drug supply, which could be completely eliminated with a clean supply. So it's a different way of looking, I guess, at the body count. But those are young people in the workforce. I know it's a big deal in I think people who work out in remote camps and stuff tend to do it recreationally a lot. And I don't know if anybody can cast any light on why the profit motive requires people to sell such a corrupted product that it kills so many people. But Like those numbers are pretty staggering. You know, the body, and that's in that's in one province which has 5 million people. 2,200 young people or 2,100 young people died, 7 a day in 2021, and it's been going on for like 7 years. So that's just a crushing body count. You know, like those are like Vietnam numbers. It's and why? There's no why behind it. We could replace all of that with a prescription for clean fentanyl or something better, or and treatment programs. So that one just really sticks in my craw. We have, you know, a shortage of people in the workforce, widows and families and kids are being left orphans and stuff, and it's just shit in the drugs. So that's my little rant.
Well, I have a question to that, Hawthorne, because you said something right at the start that really piqued my interest about it. Like, who contaminates this drug supply? You know, so how does this fentanyl get mixed in with heroin and fucking crack? Like, who the fuck's producing fentanyl? It's probably the same people who produce the same, you know, drugs they use for heroin and crack. It's just like, but where did it come from? Like, why did fentanyl become so big seemingly overnight when heroin and crack have been around since like the 80s? It could be a new name for something that's the same, but just a bit more potent. Who knows what these kids are putting in their drugs these days? I wonder why they call meth battery acid. Makes me feel bad. Like, this whole war on drugs, I don't think it has too much to relate to the entirety of the circumstances that go on today, but I think
If I
it
could
was
just,
the forefront to it.
um, I'll just read you a paragraph here. Fentanyl was detected in 83% of the deaths, and carfentanil, a stronger analog, was found in 187 deaths. She pointed out the increased presence of benzodiazepines, which are typically described as a sedative, as they are particularly dangerous when paired with an opioid like fentanyl because the sedation increases the risk of an overdose. But that's not really answering the why. Like, I don't understand why it's more profitable to sell a drug that's going to kill people. But I guess it's the pirate marketplace, right? It's whatever shit they can put together and sell. And it seems to me like a government and a medical system and a legal system should have a way of dealing with that is in some way proportionate, like what you were describing. Those scheduled drugs, you know, have an element of anticipated harm to the user, right? You know, you get addicted to marijuana or LSD or something like that. That's, these are young people who are just dying by the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, and it's instantaneous, right? Like when you get that shit, if you don't have a backup plan, you're gone. So this is just one that I don't understand the dynamics of it. I just know
Ooh,
that it's an ongoing epidemic here in our province.
I want to tackle
I
this.
have an Hermes, if I may, I have an idea that might just get me shot in the head. And you know how in the 80s, in like Richard Nixon eras, 70s and 80s, 90s till today, whatever, crack was the biggest drug on the street. But it mostly affected, you know, communities of colored people, like blacks, Mexicans, like crack and meth was their drug, but fentanyl and heroin has always been predominantly more known to be of the Caucasian people's choice. And where does like the most fentanyl deaths? At least in the United States and, you know, Mexico, Canada, whatever. Where do the most of those deaths happen? In very rural communities where painkillers and like a lot of old war vets seem to come from. If we're talking war on drugs and conspiracies, honestly, fentanyl could just be the CIA's next bet to. They destroyed the African American community when it was probably at its most developed socially. maybe it's trying to destroy it's weird to say, but like Caucasian community or whatever on the eve of a new war. Who knows? This is like war on drugs could be on the levels of like psyops and alien shit, but I still believe it's people behind it. And what strings are they pulling? And who will they kill to silence? War
I'm,
on drugs is fun.
I'm gonna try to explain the fentanyl thing, but before that, I'm gonna give a little bit of numbers. So, around 100K deaths are attributed to opioids in the U.S. annually, at least last year or whatever. 100,000 people, a lot of them young. But it's also important to remember that an estimated 95,000 people die due to alcohol-related causes annually in the U.S. as well, and it's the third leading preventable cause of death in the United States, yet it's legal, and profit is literally made off the blood of those people and many other people that don't die but have their lives ruined, alcoholism, losing jobs, family problems, blah, 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 beating your wife, all sorts of shit, driving drunk. Alcohol has a lot of detrimental effects, yet, it's totally cool. So I just once again want to emphasize how baseless the scheduling system really is. As for the whole fentanyl thing, if drugs were legal and people were getting drugs, like in a more regulated way, the chances of it being contaminated by fentanyl or whatever would be next to zero. Why do I think people contaminate it? I think there are logical reasons, not necessarily nefarious reasons. So fentanyl is, I think, 100 times more potent than morphine or something. I don't know. It's crazy, 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 crazy potent. I'm talking like few, like nanograms or micrograms or whatever is enough to totally fuck you up, which is why it's so fucking dangerous. But the reason I can think why this makes sense, first, you have to make a lot less for the same amount of profit. So that in and of itself makes it very economically attractive. There's also the problem of traveling with contrabands. If it's the smaller it is, the easier it is to get that through. The less like potential of you getting caught if you have to bring like 10 bags of heroin or like 2 tablespoons of fentanyl. It's obviously easier to get through with that. So like the more draconian we get with the drug enforcement, the more people have to come up with creative, more potent ways of getting around it, which can potentially lead to these kinds of opioid death epidemics. I mean, I just think it's a shit show all the way from top to bottom. It really is one of those things where you should get up in the morning and think, this is fucked up. Right now, there are people in jail that are innocent, that are there for nonviolent crimes, suffering. A lot of money is being wasted. A lot of potential is being wasted. A lot of lives are being wasted. People die. What can I do about it? And I think that's really the question. What can we do about it? We already know it's fucked beyond belief. What is the solution to this insane problem that takes so many lives?
I would have to say the answer is community, as scary as that sounds. The only way to stop a problem like the rampant drug abuse that plagues every country on this planet generally goes down to the individual. But that's a monumental task, so you need the community. It's so much deeper and harder than I say, but that's it's coming from not wanting to uh, almost like I don't want to say it because I don't know if you're getting recorded, but it's like a Jesus perspective. It's sometimes like because one of my coworkers is a recovering heroin addict, and he was on it for like since he was in high school. So uh, it's hard to say how you can combat the use of drugs. I think it goes down to the individual on some point. Like maybe they realize something, but is it as far as fentanyl goes? I wonder if the war on drugs was meant to like imagine just somebody just like a small town chemist or whatever, just some small drug dealer, invented fentanyl on its own, like devil's advocate moment. Do you think the war on drugs was like created to prevent somebody from creating fentanyl? Because I think it's more likely that the government created fentanyl itself, and you know, however it does, slips it into the general drug supply, which is, and Hawthorne said, that's a good term. That's a very interesting term. Like the drug supply that goes from Mexico and Colombia and everywhere into America. I wonder how many CIA agents just have their like little hands in that.
I think that the government doesn't have to, create fentanyl or anything like that. I just think that having the atmosphere of a draconian type of police military state against drugs, people are searched, no knock warrants, all sorts of crazy shit. And this incentivizes people to create drugs that are more easier to travel with because you want to not get caught, you want to make maximum amount of profit, whatever. So then the logical consequence is developing a drug that is far more potent, that's easier to travel, easier to produce, blah blah blah, all sorts of shit, harder to detect. So it's just it like the incentives, like the war on drugs created the incentives for fentanyl is what I would argue. Like it would you don't even need to put someone up to the task of it. Just having these restrictions and then having the desire to make profit off of something that's illegal and there's a demand for it and then you can get away with it and there's no regulation, it just makes perfect sense. Like it's logical, it's rational self-interest in an evil way, but it's just logical.
Mm.
I
It
can see.
does. Oh
Go ahead.
yes. No, no, no. On you. I was disagreeing.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. I was just thinking, in Canada, most liquor is sold through government liquor stores, government-owned liquor stores. So, and if you actually legalized fentanyl in order to create a safe supply, then the government stores would effectively become like the drug dealers to the country. And then there would be all kinds of issues like, people are still probably going to die, right? Because I think a lot of the deaths are like when people just do too much or, they aspirate their own vomit or whatever. So then all that, and I also think about vulnerable or like groups that have had trouble with drugs in the past, like First Nations communities. So now they're going to get government fentanyl shipped in or provided somehow. So I think from a government policy point of view, it just becomes this like black hole of, fuck, I just don't want to touch that from a government point of view. And then you're left with the devil that we have, which is people dying every single day of overdosing on dirty fentanyl when they could have just woken up a few minutes later. So it's a real like fire in the frying pan kind of situation, one way or the other, we get burned.
I do think though dealing with it is having a proactive approach dealing with it, and I mean actually dealing with it like from a doctor's perspective, not just trying to mask the symptoms, which doesn't actually solve the issue, but trying to deal with the causal roots and blah blah blah. I think that is the approach that needs to be taken. I don't think standing back is effective. I don't know the details when it comes to Canada. I have to look into that to be more informed to say anything about it. But I can say that when it comes to the US, due to our medical system here, which we don't really even have one, it's totally fucked up. A lot of people that need medical help don't have the option for medical help, which further exacerbates the issue and then, leads to more likelihood of, using drugs. Also, when drugs are illegal, you're less likely to seek help because you fear getting caught or whatever. It just like all the incentives that are out there is basically isolate yourself from society, don't seek help, go as illegal as you can, and if you're caught, you're fucked. You can never reintegrate back into society, and your friends and family, the people that love you, are most likely going to suffer incredibly as well. And then they potentially might also get into drugs. And it's just a shit show all around, at least in the US. Um, yeah, Ronald Reagan, sorry, why did I say Reagan? So it was Nixon, right? Um, shit. I think it was Nixon.
Richard Nixon
Yeah, yeah.
declared that
Why did I say
drugs.
wrong? But yeah, yeah, what a piece of shit, honestly. Like, fuck that dude. The amount of blood that is on his hands, totally fucked. Like, not cool. And the legacy he has, I hope in the future is gonna be more and more reflected on the same way the Nazis were. You know, I hope like 100 years from now we look back at Richard Nixon and consider him right next to Hitler. You know, for being a person that caused the unnecessary suffering of innocent people. Of course, not to that degree, but you get what I mean. Like, I want the scorn of society. I want his legacy to go down in dirt. That's all I meant. Obviously, there are different degrees. Hitler was fucking crazy, way worse. Um, Point is, though, this is horrible, and I still don't know what we can do. At least in the U.S., you said community, but I don't know if that's gonna spread fast and quick enough so that we can minimize the harm, because the harm is happening every day. It's happening all the time. It's happening right now in prison. There are people that are suffering for marijuana, for the shit that I do. They're suffering. That's insane. That is so insane. It is a moral outrage, and this complacency and this relaxed attitude that we've gotten desensitized to this is insane. And I think that is part of the issue. We shouldn't just chill because, oh, well, this is just, it's been this way for a while. What are we going to do about it? No, this is the kind of thing where having your blood boil with anger is healthy. It is healthy to be angry when there's injustice. It's very unhealthy to not be angry when there's injustice. That's all I want to say.
Uh, fair. Okay, I'm unmuted. I mean, fair enough that, like, how you say, in the eyes of watching the injustice, it's every right to be angry, but that's why I brought up community. Like, community being whatever you think it being, it it cannot change without any social force driving it. Like, the community develops with each individual within it. And so if we were to combat the war on drugs using community, to put it like that, it's like it's having to see why these drugs always come up in the community. And it's like, I think a lot of it where it started with, and yeah, Nixon, I think, started the crack epidemic and all that. I, I want to say that there's reasons behind why these things happened, and we're only told so much of it, or at least everything that I've learned about it. I don't think that's just the final straw. It always goes deeper to the person that wrote that book, to the person that was the reason that they wrote that book. Like, I don't understand how crack just, because from World War II on, they had methamphetamines. Like, the Germans invented methamphetamine, and then what happened? Like, somehow America, who took in all these German scientists, and all these mega corporations started popping up. The 1950s American dream started springing from all these white collar jobs. Maybe it could have been, hear me out, maybe the war of drugs could have been African Americans, or as the old white people would have said, I'm not going to say it, started getting concerned that they weren't as stupid as people thought. So they introduced drugs to keep them out of these white collar jobs, these banking jobs, these banking industries. It could make sense because that's why it's always painted as like attacking the black communities. But these same drugs kind of snuck their way in from people just trying to make money selling them from the CIA or whoever, the cartels, the CIA. Who can tell the difference anymore? We just hit the suburbs. And these drugs just started getting more. When these drugs started hitting, I guess, the suburbs in a sense, maybe that's when the national focus started taking a hold, and that's when the government, in the community wise, the governments, or at least the people who responded to the drug problems, started influencing more military state police. It could be one giant long term plan, don't get me wrong. You'd be foolish to think that some people in the government don't think this long ahead. So we have PSYOP agencies. But the way to counteract it, how can we counteract that? People who've already put such plans into effect.
And I've got a little hypothetical history experiment. Supposing instead of Nixon saying there's a war on drugs, he said, as a culture, we're going to embrace drugs and make that part of our cultural fabric. And maybe that's a little too mind bending, but I mean, Canada has legal weed shops. I'm sure they do all through the States now too, right? Well, supposing what we were trying to do to combat fentanyl was to say, we're going to sell a whole bunch of other stuff like psilocybin and, ketamine, and we could go on and on, microdosing of LSD and stuff, and just make like enriching your life with different selected drugs kind of a normal thing. Then is it possible to marginalize fentanyl as just like dangerous shit that you don't need to try? You could just try the mushrooms. They're legit. So it's giving people more safe drug choices, so that they can do trippy things. But you don't do that. Shit off the street. It could kill you. The government doesn't have to push fentanyl. That's what I'm saying. I can see why they have a problem with that. But there are a lot of much safer things, and all the research that was being done, like by Timothy Leary on LSD, and it was being like explored for its psychological potential and for its military and intelligence applications as well. But it was all good with the government until the government said it's no good anymore. And this is the first time I've ever sort of thought, geez, what if they hadn't done that? What if the hippie revolution had sort of been commercialized at that time, and they said, yeah, let's package this stuff and put it in shrink wrap and sell it for 4 times the price. Anyway, that's just a thought.
I don't think the hippie thing would ever work because it was kind of anti-war, and we were in a war at that time. So it actually made sense to target the hippies using the substances that they were using, which made them more peaceful and more connected and blah, 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 blah. So I think it's fucked up to the core. And what you brought up, I didn't even consider it as a factor. And oh my God, you're absolutely correct. Psilocybin is highly effective at treating addiction. There are multiple studies from Johns Hopkins University and many other places that show the potential of psilocybin for treating addiction. So having that for people that are addicted to opiates or whatever, this could be kind of like a miracle cure to some extent. It's insane how effective psilocybin is when it comes to treating addiction, not causing it. Also, the thing you said about, you sure if like weed is legal in the States all over? No, unfortunately not. We're not as cool as our northern neighbor. We still have many states that criminalize marijuana, and if you're caught with it, your entire life is fucked. That still happens today in 2022 in the US. So that's fucked up. Also, I want to point out that while I got the president wrong when I was talking about Nixon, Ronald Reagan did play a key part in the expansion of the war on drugs. And I'm reading this from Botanica. The war on drugs was a relatively small component of federal law enforcement efforts until the presidency of Ronald Reagan, which began in 1981. Reagan greatly expanded the reach of the drug war, and his focus on criminal punishment over treatment led to a massive increase in incarcerations for nonviolent drug offenses, from 50,000 in 1980 to 400,000 in 1997. In 1984, his wife, Nancy, spearheaded another facet of the war on drugs with her Just Say No campaign, which was a privately funded effort to educate school children on on the dangers of drug use. And then I can go on and on. So Ronald Reagan played a huge fucking role in it as well, and I hope he's remembered as a piece of shit as well in the future. Hopefully, I have hope for future historians. And another thing that I would like to point out with the war on drugs is marijuana arrests in the U.S. So African Americans and like Caucasians and white people, whatever, they use marijuana at this nearly the same rate as African Americans. Yet African Americans are charged 4 times the rates of whites. Let me just read it verbatim from the website. Normal. Um, African Americans are arrested for violating marijuana possession laws at nearly 4 times the rate of whites, yet both ethnicities consume marijuana at roughly the same rates. That's 400%. That's insane. This disproportionate. And of course, once you're caught, the sentence also is disproportionately higher and blah, blah, blah. There is injustice, real injustice to get angry about every day. There's a lot of bullshit all around, distractions, but real problems that are destroying the lives of thousands of people. This problem is happening right now. We can do something about it, I think. But I just don't know what. But it is like when it comes to priorities, dealing with problems that are more severe makes sense to prioritize that over ones that are less severe. Just to make logical sense. So the war on drugs, I would put it right up there with with prison reform, with the homeless problem. I mean, no, that's way smaller. But the point, war on poverty, yeah, that's one. That's super big. That must be there. War on hunger and blah, blah, blah. So these are like huge, real issues. Mental illness and suicide rates, those are another real issue in society that is continuously present, but we've kind of gone numb to. It just, like, there was that YouTube clip about you got to get angry, you know? I swear, I think we do got to get angry. It's fucked up. Kind of done. Anything you want to say, Shogun? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Sorry, but no, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said on the subject, and maybe in the future we'll dive into it from specific angles or something like that. But this is a good first round. Does anyone else have any comments before we maybe close out?
I was just going to track it back to, I mean, it's easy to connect the war on drugs and the supply of prisoners for the American prison system, which I think has more prisoners than like any other country in the world or something in relation to its population, the land of the free. But now having privatized prisons, they're profit-making companies, and they have essentially been guaranteed a supply of like prisoners. So they have a really powerful lobby to keep the laws in place, because that's where they get their, $60,000 to $80,000 per year per inmate from. So that I think that has a further corrupting influence on the whole justice system.
And honestly, I think that is a result of the war on drugs itself. Like, I can play devil's advocate all I want and say, there could have been some good parts to it, either on a philosophical or an emotional state of like what the war on drugs could be. But a direct result is having prisons and mental institutions that are literally based on the idea of profit. Like, these inmates go in there, and per inmate, per inmate, basically, no matter which situation, is that they are getting taxpayer money to fund the horrible mistreatment that generally they're going through. Like, they're prisons, but we're paying for prisons that treat these people like. And I, what, honestly, prisons aren't supposed to be fun. Like, whatever. Like, there's always been prisons, but like, we're paying companies to treat these people and not rehabilitate them. and it's such a brutally corrupt oversight of like how these people worm their way into the system and like actually take money. It's like such a like it's fucking transcends fucking Tom Clancy novels, and that's just the reality that we live in. Just these people have gone into the system, and through this war on drugs, through the whole in life that they lived, they found a way